Thank you everyone for waiting. Good evening and yokoso. My name is Chris Pilkovich, Managing Director of MIT Japan Program, and I am delighted to welcome you to From Samurai into Engineers panel discussion. I'd like to extend a very special welcome to we're supposed to have our friends from the Consulate General of Japan, but I don't see them yet. Our friends from nearby universities, MIT faculty, staff, students, and a big welcome and welcome home to our alumni. This year, we're celebrating the 150th anniversary of the first Japanese student, Honma Eiichiro, graduating from MIT. The sponsors of this evening, MIT History Department, MIT Libraries, and MIT Japan Program are thrilled you're here with us to celebrate and learn more about the incredible stories of the first MIT students here at MIT. I would also like to extend a very warm welcome to our Chancellor, Chancellor Melissa Nobles, class of 1922, Professor of Political Science, and to ask her to give some remarks for this evening. Melissa, Chancellor.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, there you go. That was a good hello. Thank you, Chris, for inviting me here tonight. And thank you also to our Misty Japan colleagues for creating immersive, impactful learning experiences for students and faculty alike in Japan, and for helping to foster a vibrant community on campus spanning from student social and sports clubs related to Japan, Japanese language classes, and humanities courses focused on Japan. I'd also like to extend a warm welcome, although he's not here yet, the Deputy Counsel General. Not yet, okay. When they get here, we're happy to have them here. Is that the total? There were 201 people coming? Okay. I'd also like to thank Professor Hiromu Nagahara, for bringing Japanese history to life in the classroom from course 21H 155. I know we'll hear from some of his students tonight, and also want to thank him for helping to create an exhibit here at Hayden. Thank you. Tonight I want to commemorate the long history of MIT US and Japan collaboration, including the MIT Japan program that was created in 1981 and has been sending MIT students to Japan for internship and research opportunities since 1985. This is some 40 years of collaboration, so I want to give a big applause for 40 years of partnership. And I'm here with you this evening to mark an even more remarkable milestone, the 150th anniversary of the first Japanese student to graduate from MIT. This milestone reminds us of MIT's age. MIT has been around since 1865, and we celebrated our 150th anniversary in 2011. And this milestone highlights that international students have been part of MIT's fabric for a very long time, nearly from the start. So let me pronounce this correctly. So forgive me, because I'm fearful that I'm going to mispronounce, so I hope I have your generosity and spirit with me on this. Eiichiro Honma, who you're going to hear a lot about tonight, was a pioneer international student. He was likely one of the first 2 international students to graduate from MIT, and he was the first Asian to graduate from MIT, and he was the first Japanese student to graduate from MIT. So that's a lot of firsts. And when someone is the first, they help pave a path, making things easier and brighter for those who follow, both here on campus and in their hometowns. It helps to illuminate what's possible. It helps people dream. Today at MIT, we continue to welcome students from Japan, from Asia, from all around the globe, and from all parts of the United States. We celebrate the incredible things that happen when we bring brilliant people from different backgrounds and identities together to learn, to socialize, and to live together. And we celebrate that our graduates bring the talents and skills they hone at MIT to wherever they land after our pomp and circumstance on Killian Court. As Chancellor, I talk a lot about supporting the whole student, about helping students create personal and professional lives that are rich in meaning, citizenship, and humanity. Examining the history of our students, such as the history of our first Japanese graduates, can help us illuminate how today's students can be their whole selves. So yeah, I'm kind of biased. I'm a political scientist. As you know, I'm also big on history, and I love archives. So I'm really excited here to be here with everyone tonight, to hear about MIT's first Japanese students, to think about how far we've come, to think about what stayed the same, and to consider the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. So with that, I look forward to our panel, and thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chancellor Nobles. Chancellor Nobles mentioned that we sent the students in the early 80s, but the MIT Japan program was a vision of my faculty director, Professor Richard Samuels. Not only is a political scientist, there's a lot of political scientists in this room tonight, but it was a vision for him to create MIT students to be global citizens, future engineers, scientists, technologists who can be a bridge. So he created this program and made the students, required the students to learn Japanese and learn Japanese culture, to give them a foundation before they went off to do research, training at leading Japanese institutions, labs, and to be the next generation. Maybe they're a different ambassador to Japan and the US. As you'll find out later on, these first Japanese who came to MIT also were. MIT Japan program has sent over 1,200 students to Japan. And there's some of those students, or former students, out in the audience. So welcome back and thank you for coming here. We also nurture relationship with faculty and researchers in Japan. We have the Hayashi Ulvac Seed Fund that supports cross-border research collaboration with Japanese scientists and engineers. And I see some people in the audience who have also received the Hayashi Ulvac grant. There we go, we have some raising their hands, and thank you for joining us. Excuse me?
When does actual history start? Can we skip the boring part, please?
Yes, we'll be there in a second, thank you. So I'm also want to mention that the MIT Japan program was a precursor to MISTI, as it was mentioned. It's the MIT International Science and Technology Initiative. And MIT Japan program paved the way. Now we have over 25 country and regional programs and send this past academic year 1,400 students overseas. So now I would like to hand over the mic to Professor Hiromu Nagahara, Mitsui Career Development Professor and a historian of modern Japan with a focus on political art and culture, and for our panel discussion that everybody has been waiting for, from samurai into engineers. Hiromu-san, yoroshiku onegai shimasu.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you, Chris, and thank you again, Chancellor Nobles, for your wonderful remark. And thank you, everyone, for joining us here today to celebrate the 150th anniversary of Eiichiro Honma's graduation. This coincides with the opening of both a physical and an online exhibit with the same title, From Samurai into Engineers. In fact, if you look behind you in that loft area above, you can see this physical exhibit. It's in a case in the loft area, so I encourage you to visit there later on if you have time. And you'll be able to go to the main online exhibit by going to the MIT Library's digital exhibit website. So please do check that out. Before I introduce the speakers today, I would like to thank several people and institutions within MIT without whom this project wouldn't have been possible. This program is hosted by MIT Libraries, MIT Japan program, and MIT History. And so I would like to thank from MIT Japan, Chris Pilkovich, who is the impresario for today's celebration, and yeah, you can feel free to clap. But she's been a critical partner for me in this sort of celebration and research since last year, so I'm very, very grateful. I would also like to thank Dick Samuel's support, and as Chris and Chancellor Nobles mentioned, he is really the founder of the MIT Japan program, which has sort of blossomed into so many great endeavors, and today is one of those products. From the MIT Libraries, I would really like to thank the wonderful staff of the MIT Distinctive Collections, the MIT Archives, and in particular, Amanda Hawk, who's back there. She is the main archivist that I've been working with, along with my students, to explore this early history of Honma and other Japanese students. And she is also the one who has partnered with me in creating the online exhibit as well. So I'm very, very grateful. I'm also grateful to Sylvia Figueroa Ortiz of the MIT Library's Community Engagement Department. She's back there. And she's facilitated today's celebration as well. And then I would like to thank from MIT History, my colleagues, Malik Gautam, who's the head of our unit, and in particular, Emma Tang, who pioneered this kind of search into MIT history with the China Comes to MIT project, Craig Wilder, who continued that with MIT and Slavery Project, and Sana Iyer, who's MIT South Asia and the Institute project we celebrated last year. And in speaking of that particular project, I would also like to thank Noreen Das, who partnered with Sana in that project and who is now at the MIT Alumni Association. Without their sort of advice and support, this wouldn't have been possible. So thank you so much to all of you. And last but not least, I would like to thank my students in the 21H155 class from spring of this year. There were several others from that class. All of us together explored through these historical documents together and made these discoveries, and I'm really thrilled to be able to hear from 4 of them today. So allow me to introduce the speakers of the panel. We will hear from 2 of my dear colleagues from Japan, Keio University in Japan. We will first hear from Professor Masamichi Ogawara of Keio University, who is joining us remotely through a pre-recorded presentation on 2 of the early Japanese students at MIT, Takuma Dan and Stejiro Fukuzawa. We will then hear from 4 students, Kailis B. Kaler, Kyuchol Min, Rachel Jiang, and Shipeng Huang. We are also fortunate to welcome here today Professor Yuichiro Shimizu, also from the Keio University. He is a prolific historian of modern Japanese politics, and among his recent works was an English language publication that was published through Bloomsbury called The Origins of Modern Japanese Bureaucracy. And in fact, the story of Japanese students going to overseas is a big part of that larger story. And in fact, Professor Shimizu, Professor Iyer, and I have been collaborating since 2018, connecting his class at Keio University in Japan with our world history class at MIT. And we've been sort of having the students of both classes collaborate together. In fact, we're continuing with that this fall in our 4th collaboration. And we will be together sort of exploring our shared history between Keio and MIT, between Japan and United States. And so without, and time permitting, I'll make a closing remark at the end, but I want to get the show rolling. So we're going to start first with Professor Ogawara's presentation.
Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to introduce to you today a dear colleague of mine, Professor Masamichi Ogawara, who comes to us from Keio University's Faculty of Law and the Department of Political Science. Professor Ogawara is a historian of modern Japanese political politics, broadly defined. He's a prolific author who's written many books on various topics, including the history of political thought, relationship between politics and religion, and last but not least, the history of modern Japan's first international students, especially those who had come to the East Coast of the United States. And in fact, one of the books that he's written recently, I have it right here with me. In Japanese, it's called Meiji Nihon wa Amerika kara nani o mananda no ka? What did Meiji era Japan learn from the United States? And it's a wonderful book that looks at several key students who had gone to major universities like MIT, Harvard, Yale, and so forth during the mid to late 19th century. And he's also written another book on a related topic called Keio Gijuku no Kindai Amerika Ryugakusei, the international students from Keio Gijuku University in the modern era. And that book focuses specifically on students who had gone from or are connected to Keio University, where Professor Ogawara teaches. And in fact, one of the things that I think Professor Ogawara will be talking to us today is about how the founder of Keio University, a man named Yuichiro, who was a intellectual giant of modern Japan, had in fact sent one of his sons to attend MIT in the late 19th century. So with that, I would like to give the floor to Professor Ogawara. どうぞよろしくお願いします。
Thank you for your kind introduction, Professor Nagahara. Hello, everyone. My name is Masamichi Ogawara Masamichi of Keio University. Let me share my slides of PowerPoint. Can you check this?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, yeah. Okay, my topic today is early Japanese students at MIT study courses, networks, and private diplomacy. Early Japanese students at MIT, as we will see, included most notably Dan Takuma, the later chairman of Mitsui, and Fukuzawa Stejiro, a son of Fukuzawa Yukichi, and the later president of the Jijishimpo newspaper, as well as Honma Eiichiro, the first Japanese to graduate from MIT in 1874. Especially from the late 1880s onwards, when the Meiji Constitution was promulgated, Japan famously looked to Germany as a political model. For this reason, Japanese elite students from Tokyo Imperial University were dispatched to study abroad were commonly enrolled at German universities. Before this, in the 1870s and early 1880s, however, Japanese students abroad were dispersed more widely over the US, UK, France, and Germany. In 1871, for example, no less than 82 Japanese students left for the US, while the number of Japanese students dispatched to Germany did not exceed 32. The great majority of these early students in the US headed to the famous universities of the East Coast, such as MIT, Harvard, Yale, and Columbia. After the beginning of 20th century, by the way, Japanese students in the US popularly referred to as school boards more typically attended secondary schools on the West Coast while also working in shops and on fields. Let me now turn to MIT and Dan Takuma in particular. Dan was born in Fukuoka in 1858. After graduating with a degree in mining from MIT, he went on to work for Mitsui Mining and ultimately rose to become Director General of the Mitsui Corporation. In 1932, he died at the hand of a right-wing fanatic. Due to Dan's outstanding achievements as a student, his study sojourn in America was financed by a grant from the former daimyo house of Fukuoka domain, known for its upbeat engagement in promotion of scholarship and overseas study following the Meiji Restoration. Traveling to America with the Iwakura mission of 1871 to 73, Dan in fact reached his destination in the company of Kuroda Nagatomo, his former feudal lord. Dan's group arrived in San Francisco in January of 1872 and ultimately parted ways with the Iwakura mission in Chicago. They arrived in Boston via New York in March. Dan's study destination, however, was not decided beforehand. In New York, Kuroda, Dan, and Kaneko Kentaro, who also accompanied them, were greeted by another Fukuoka native Inoue Yoshikazu, who guided them through the city. Inoue's excellent English skills convinced Dan of the need to study English on location. Inoue was the first Japanese student to graduate from Harvard Law School and subsequently became a professor at the University of Tokyo. Dan decided to follow in Inoue's footsteps and headed for Boston for this reason. In Boston, Dan's group was welcomed by Honma Eiichiro, who, together with Inoue, had arranged for their lodging and an English tutor. Dan had originally aspired to a military career, but as he recounts in memories recorded in his later life, the fact that Honma, another Fukuoka native, was studying civil engineering at MIT made a strong impression on him. He did not want to copy Honma, however, as I wished to build the foundation of 4 railroads. Dan recalled, I thought I'd try out mining instead. He ultimately graduated with a BS in mining in 1878. Dan thus became the second Japanese to earn a degree from MIT after Honma. As a Director General of Mitsui Conglomerate Zaibatsu, Dan accordingly led a Japanese business delegation to the United States and also visited Boston to give speeches at MIT's Convocation Hall and the Boston Chamber of Commerce in 1921. Dan engaged in a private diplomatic mission, telling his audience that Japan was strongly favoring peace, international harmony, and disarmament. He further emphasizes that Japan was not beholden to egoistic economic policies, but rather saw the need to realize both countries' mutual interests. In his reminiscence of the time, Dan also voiced sharp criticism of the rise of nationalism, observing that while during his student days America had been marked by a primitive spirit of independence, valuing freedom before all, today in both Japan and America, the spirit had been lost. What the two countries needed were friendship and dialogue rooted in morality and religion. Dan was ultimately fated to die at the hand of an ultra-nationalist assassin, but when the Technology Association of Japan was founded as the Japanese MIT Alumni Organization in 1911, Dan became its secretary, and when this group was reorganized in 1925, he became its president. As such, he was concerned to promote not only connections and exchange between alumni, but also to strengthen relations between MIT and Japan. This association still continues its activities under the name MIT Club of Japan today. The main members of the Technology Association of Japan at the time of its founding had been Dan, Honma, and Fukuda Stejiro, the second son of Fukuda Yukichi. In line with the wishes of his father, the founder of Keio University and one of the intellectual founding fathers of modern Japan. Yukichi wanted to send his eldest son, Ichitaro and Stejiro, to study in America based on his own experiences in the Western world. Recognizing the importance of railway construction for Japan's modernization, Yukichi encouraged Stejiro to study railroad engineering. He sent numerous letters from Japan to encourage and support both of them. Stejiro had enrolled at MIT in 1884 and graduated with a degree in railroad engineering in 1888. In a letter addressed to Stejiro in May 1887, Yukichi advised him that there was a shortage of skilled individuals in Japan for the construction of railways, bridges, and tunnels. He encouraged Stejiro to study these techniques and management of railway companies. Upon his return to Japan, he worked for the Sanyo Railway based in Kobe and ultimately became president of the Jishinpo, the newspaper Yukichi founded. An avid newspaper reader during his sojourn in America, Stejiro would secure the Jishinpo standing at a quality paper, while also introducing new features such as cartoons, beauty contests, and war reportages on its pages. As successful entrepreneurs with special expertise on America, Stejiro and Dan were not only widely known in America, in Japan, and but also repeatedly noted at MIT. In the January 1902 issue of the Technology Review, Alfred Barton referred to Mr. Fukuzawa of the class of 88 and his newspaper, the Jishinpo, as real factors in the growth of New Japan, taking pride in the fact that this energetic and progressive man was a loyal son of tech. At the time of Stejiro's death, in the January 1927 issue of the Technology Review, William Snow would likewise remember him as the proprietor and manager of the Jishinpo, one of the leading newspapers of his country. In the wake of Dan's assassination on March 7, 1932, MIT Tech likened his position to that of the top executives of Morgan of the Rockefeller Group. To sum up, the first Japanese students at MIT, Honma and Dan, were of samurai background from Fukuoka. The first generation of Japanese students at MIT went on to play important roles in the world of Japanese finance, journalism, and railroads, and also engaged in private diplomacy between the two nations. The important contributions to the modernization of Japan repeatedly received mention also at MIT. They continued to associate in an alumni organization which is active to this day. The historical ties between MIT and Japan can thus only be described as long-standing and deep. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Professor Ogawara, for your presentation and for providing the knowledge sort of about the early MIT students from Japan, and especially the Keio connection. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right. So it's always strange to see your own face in the video. We're done with that, thankfully. Now I would like to invite our student researchers to present. Each of them will present for a few minutes on different topics. Two of them will talk about Eiichiro Honma, both before he came to MIT and his time at MIT, and then two others will present on Takumadan. So without further ado, I would like to first invite Kailis B. Kaler to join us up here. Kailis, please come here.
Okay. Yosh. So hello everyone, I'm Kailas, and I'm going to be talking about Honma's diary, which was the primary source that I dealt with for when I was taking Nagahara sensei's class for the final project. So just some background on the diary. It's, I assume I can talk through the announcement. It's written in cursive English, so even though Honma was Japanese, many of the things he wrote when he was here, including also the constitution of the Japanese Students Club, was written in English, written in cursive. You can see that he writes his name at the top here. He uses a little different of a romanization than we might use nowadays, but he also puts his hometown and the kind of domain that he would have been from originally as well in the top. So the diary can generally be dated from August 31st to April 21st, 1870. Each day's entry is dated and keyed with a little weather icon. You can see in this bottom right, the very top left, there's this little like circle, and those generally tell you what the weather was for the given day. This was when he was enrolled at Highland Military Academy, which is in Worcester, so west from here. And this is the same year that he would later enroll at MIT. This bottom picture here is his entry. For some reason, we're missing the 1870-71 listing, but this is when he was listed as a second year the next year. And so other people that often occur in this diary is so Inoue, who also went by a different last name or first name in some cases, and then Yamada. So both these people, you can see that Inoue is given by an E in the diary usually. This is again difference in romanization. And then also Hiraga, his mentor, who is usually written as sensei. And then so I generally went through this analyzing both what is said in the diary, but also like cross-referencing it with newspapers and some of his letters, which can be kind of linked to the same dates. So this little snippet here, the bottom is actually from a newspaper just around the same time. It documents the 3 Japanese students when they actually came to Worcester. So, all right. Next chunk. So the happenings that happen in the actual diary can be broken down to basically 3 main chunks. The first is the end of term at the Highland Military Academy. He travels back to Boston. Some things that I thought were cool is like references to basically how things were back in the day. So like open and Hackney carriages, the Foster Street Depot, which doesn't exist anymore in Worcester, but used to be essentially their own old train station. Street carriages, this is kind of like the equivalent to what we use like the subway now for. You have these different like public cars, which at this point were still driven by horses, that would be going up and down various different streets of note, basically back in the kind of what is now South Station area. And then he also notes kind of visiting some of the American acquaintances who aided him and Inoue with their English studies earlier on, and these people can also be cross-referenced in other correspondences. These are people like in this top photo, there's kind of a chunk of these people, like Mr. Reed, Grandma Weston. They're often referenced in other sources talking about Honma's letters and stuff like that. So then he takes a trip to New York City, which seemingly is where one of his classmates, who's usually goes by E.P. Price or Eddie Price, lives. In this trip, he visits many landmarks, including Wallack's Theater, the Grand Opera House, Madison Square, the New York Stock Exchange, Trinity Church, a bunch of these other ones. They're also guided by a person named Captain DeGroot to the Navy Yard and also the office of the New York Herald. Now, the New York Herald's not the only newspaper they visit, but this is kind of just an interesting one where both in this kind of middle journal picture on the right, you see him kind of talking about the Herald, which he calls kind of the largest and grandest of them all. And then you can see in this little bottom right picture, it's actually the herald's account of them coming to the herald and actually looking around all the kind of different machinery and stuff like that. And then later, you've turned to Highland Academy. These entries are generally shorter, less eventful. So this bottom picture here is kind of talking about that. It's a very short entry. I had some studies. I got up when I got up. It's not super noteworthy stuff. Okay, and then into takeaways. So, I mean, first thing is that this is kind of a view into what the Northeast United States was like around 1870. So it's not just learning about the Japanese students' experiences, but also just what it was like for just Americans. There's also a pretty consistent undertone of Honma and Inoue's like service to Japan, and also a genuine curiosity about the world. So when he's going to New York, part of it is like learning about how the U.S. does things, but another chunk of it is actually just genuine curiosity for himself. So he kind of gets this best of both worlds sometimes, where he can both have fun and look at all these new things, but also then be contributing back to Japan with the knowledge that he's gaining. And also in this service to Japan, it's also pretty collaborative, to be honest. There's not really any like idea of like espionage or sneaking by any of these secrets. All the people that they kind of meet are very happy basically to help them out. He documents his like fares and stuff being paid by some of the people who was guiding him around when he's in New York. Also, there's a kind of view into how the Japanese students integrated into the United States' racial atmosphere at the time. So he was taken to the Bryant's Minstrels in New York City, which was like a blackface performance essentially. And so this is kind of just around the Civil War time period as well. So there's a little bit of a view into how people in the Northeast, at least, viewed Japanese and the U.S. racial relations. And then additionally to that, even though it's not true, they were often introduced as princes. So you can see, in this case, it's in katakana go, so it's in Japanese. But in the top photo on the left, it says where we were basically introduced as the Japanese princesu by Lewis. I don't know why they were recognized as princes, but this is not the only time where he references that happening. So that also kind of plays into that idea. And then lastly, like linguistical barriers. So other Japanese students who came to the US documented a lot of the reverse, like when they came back from the United States, kind of feeling that they've lost some of their Japanese and their ability to communicate with the people that they knew when they were in their childhood. But in most of the newspapers and stuff that document Honma and the other students, they're generally pretty well complimented on their English ability. However, Honma still kind of has some sense of lingering inadequacy. In actually a passage when he leaves New York, he kind of says something along the lines of like, it's too bad that my control of the English language doesn't let me express my gratitude fully enough. And this is kind of, again, common with some of the other Japanese people around the same time. And personally, so I went to Japan for the summer. I had some of that same experience too, where it's like, I was in a part of Japan where there's less English, and so everything's basically Japanese. And there's times where I was like, I know what to say, but I don't know how to say it. So it's obviously something that I also kind of took to heart as well. And I didn't know I would take it to heart quite as much as I did afterwards. But yes, that's the gist of what I had. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kailas. Now we turn to Honma's study at MIT with Kyuchol Min. So Kyuchol, please come up.
Hi everyone, I'm Kicho Min. I was also a student of Professor Nagahara last semester, and I will present about Honma's technical education in MIT and what he did when he got back to Japan. So Honma's major was course 2, which was civil and topological engineering back then, so like building railways, dams, like train stations, and it was basically the hottest major of their times. Over 60% of the students were majoring in course 2 back then. To put that number into scope, currently 46% of MIT undergrads are majoring in some kind of course 6 related classes. Course 6 is electrical engineering and computer science. So yeah, it was basically very important technology back then because they had to build a lot of railways during the time of Civil War and after that. And his studies were quite advanced. The papers on the right are Honma's final thesis for his undergrad. It's design of a Warren Bridge, which is a technology. So you can see the Warren Bridge on the bottom right figure. This is a technology that has only been released 30 years prior to this paper. So it was kind of the state-of-the-art way of building the bridge. So with all these advanced technologies that Honma has learned from the States, he went back to Japan to build railways. During that time, the railway connecting Tokyo, Nagoya, and Osaka was built, and the most important project that Honma did was along the Nakasendo Trail, connecting the highland town of Karuizawa and, oh, this is a typo, Takasaki. The reason that this middle path between Takasaki and Karuizawa was so hard and was delayed was that the gradient was very harsh. It was 6.67%, which is basically just a rolling hill continuing on top of each other. So the engineers brought state-of-the-art apt rack and pinion system from Germany, which was like at the frontier of railway engineering technology. They brought the technology from Germany, and they also consulted a British engineer. And I will lastly talk about what Honma did during this project, which was very consequential and important. So principal engineer Paonel originally planned a long Wami route. So there were 3 candidates for the potential railway route between Karuizawa and Yokokawa, which is the town in front of Takasaki. And it's like the bottommost, as high as you can go up without using the app and rack pinion system. And there were 3 routes proposed for the challenging route. And Honma, who was 3rd-class chief engineer back then, proposed Nagahara route is shorter and more effective than the original Wami route that Mr. Paonel has presented. So you can see that number C is Nagahara route, which is like more like the route that's closer to a straight line. And he claimed that the road blocking issues, which was the main thing that hampered from taking this route because there were highways and traffic going right next to the proposed route, can be mitigated by installing makeshift bridges. And after extensive reinvestigation, Honma's proposal was accepted and the railway was placed along the Nagahara route. And the bridge in part of that route called Meganebashi, the glass bridge, is now one of Japan's celebrated tourist spots for its aesthetics and it as a symbol of Japan's industrialization. Yep, that's it.
Thank you, Kyucho. And now we will go on to Dan Takuma and his engineering education at MIT with Rachel Jiang and his career.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rachel. I guess similar to Honma, I also picked the most popular major in my year. I'm course 6-2. Thank you so much for Professor Nagahara for offering me the opportunity to present my research work about Dan Takuma for you all today. So Dan Takuma was a pioneering engineer and a leader in Japan industry revolution in early 20th century. And today I will talk about his education at MIT and his early career at Meiki Coal Mine. So before we dive into his education at MIT, I want to give sort of background information. So in 1872, the Ogawara Embassy, a journey that modernized the Japanese economics and connect Japan to the West World, brought the young Dan Takuma to the land of America, along with 3 other boys. And within a short period of time, Dan Takuma was able to rank top of his classes and then demonstrate exceptional skills at the Rice Grammar High School. Rice Grammar High School was a school in Boston. And then after spending several years there, and Dan Takuma was able to join the MIT as a second-year student. And when it comes to the time for picking his major, he picked mining engineering and metallurgy. So this decision, partial reason is that the Honma already picked the railroads, but another important reason is that Dan Takuma saw the potential for Japan to utilize the natural resources. So he saw the Americans use advanced techniques in mining. So he thought that his own country should also tap into those resources. So we can see that it's evident that Dan started thinking about how he could utilize his own expertise to better serve Japan, and then how to support Japan in the long term. So he already considered that even long before he completed his college degree. And then during his time at MIT, Dan Takuma also was involved in a lot of hands-on learning. So this includes a curriculum that stretches from fundamental science subjects such as chemistry to more hands-on operations such as operating the machinery and also trainings. So these practical-oriented trainings helped Dan Takuma to become more independent and creative in his professional work. And then before he left MIT and graduated, he composed his senior thesis on the experiments on the manufacture of cast iron from Catalan and Manhattan iron ores. So this paper actually describes the rigorous experimentation and analysis he had done to determine the chemical properties of the iron ores from Catalan and Manhattan. So on the right side of the slide, you can see an example of the furnace being used by the mining engineering students at the time. So perhaps Dan spent hours working there. So you can imagine the working environment at MIT during that time. And then the experiences of composing his senior thesis also deepened the connection between Dan and his department major teacher, who was Professor Robert Richards. So this ongoing mentorship continues even after Dan's graduation from MIT, because Professor Richards supported him with a lot of advice on early career and supported him to his professional journey. So after Dan Takuma graduated from MIT, he immediately returned to Japan. So he initially started working as a teacher, science teacher in college. But because of his friends Kanoko and Honma's connections, he was able to join the Ministry of Public Works in 1884. But soon after, he transferred later to the Meiki coal mine, where marked the start of his impactful career. So one of the major problems encountered by the mining industry in Japan in the early 20th century was the drainage problem, the water management. So recognizing that Dan already acquired a lot of skills from MIT and learned the latest mining technologies, the head of the company decided to send Dan to Europe to study the Davy pump with the British engineer Henry Davy. So working with the Henry Davy, Dan was able to design a pump that solved the critical water problem that has been plaguing the Meiki coal mine for years. So while Dan was abroad, the company was actually sold to Mitsui. And recognizing the exponential skills that Dan possessed, the president of Mitsui actually appointed Dan to the position of manager of Meiki coal mine. And rising to his new role, there will be new challenges. So one of the new challenges he encountered was the use of convict laborers. So many people have criticized the Meiki coal mine for the use of convict laborers because it is detrimental to the workers' mental health and health conditions. However, Dan didn't prioritize the humanitarian concerns He believed that this is an obstacle for the company's interests in the long term. And he thinks that the relationship between the manager and workers is comparable to the traditional relationship between the daimyo and their samurai. So his leadership at Mitsui also reflects the ethical dilemma faced by many Japanese industries during this period. So in this rapid time of transformation, Dan Takuma was standing at the crossroad of the tradition and modernity. So his innovative engineering approach definitely showed that Japan as a country was accepting the new technologies from Western world. But however, his conservative ideas, such as on topics of labor rights, also reflects that there has been some tensions between the economics progresses and also the ethical dilemmas during this period. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. So finally, among our student presenters, we're going to have Shipeng Huang talk to us about Dan's later role as an internationalist.
Hello, everyone. I'm Shipeng, and today I'd like to talk about Dan Takuma and his relationship with the World Engineering Congress, which is a sign of the Japanese at that time towards internationalism. So I'm gonna first briefly introduce about the World Engineering Congress, abbreviated as WEC. So this event is hosted in 1929 in Tokyo Hibiya Public Hall, and more than 1,000 experts from all over the world participated in this event. And in fact, 800 papers were collected, more than 16K pages of proceeding were published in 2 years after the Congress. So you might think of it as just like a regular engineering Congress, but it's actually something more than that. So this is actually an attempt for Japanese to display their academic and cultural hospitality. So when I say academic hospitality, I mean the WEC organizer encouraged Japanese scientists to use English to publish the paper. And in fact, about half of the collected papers of this Congress were submitted by Japanese scientists. And when it comes to cultural hospitality, the participants actually were invited to watch a no play, wisteria dance, and also the tea ceremony, which are all famous Japanese traditional culture. And this actually attracts some of the attention of the participants, because from the primary source that I have read, there are a lot of photos that Japanese women wearing a traditional kimono were taken. So besides from that, more than 100 events were hosted in this Congress. So it's not just regular meeting. It also includes parties and banquets. So some participants even joke that WEC actually stands for "We Eat Constantly." And even after a month, even 1 month after the Congress ended, there are excursions within Japan or to its colonies, such as Manchuria, Taiwan, Korea, were hosted to visit to observe the industrial condition and also to visit some famous tourist spots. So here I'm going to introduce the relation between Dan Takuma and WEC. So in fact, the executive members of WEC were well recognized in Japan and also in United States Engineering Society. So you can see some connection between those Japanese through the international societies. So Dan Takuma, who was the Director General of the Mitsui Corporation, Mitsui Gomei Kaisha at that time, the Director General of the Industry Club of Japan, which is pretty big figure in terms of the Japanese engineering society. Besides from that, he is also an honorary member of the AIME, which stands for the American Institute of Mining, Metallurgic, and Petroleum Engineering Society. So he's both known in Japan and also in the United States. And interestingly, he showed strong determination to host large attendance from the United States. They want more American experts to join this Congress. And here you can see from his letter to Samuel W. Stratton, who was the president of MIT in 1928. So here you can see Dan Takuma desperately wants like a connection towards the international world. So if you think of WEC just as, let's say, like some businessman, some private sector who wants to know more about, to blend in the international society, there's actually more than that. So WEC is actually supported by the government. So both imperial court and government members attend the WEC and serve as honorary delegates. For example, the Prime Minister, Hamaguchi Osachi, and also the Yasuhito Shino, who was the younger brother of the emperor at that time, they both attended WEC. And WEC organizer received 500,000 yen, which is actually equivalent to $45 million right now, by the government. So the government actually supported this Congress. Also, if you see the photo on the right, there's vehicle from Embassy of Spain, Poland, Norway, and Italy. So it's actually an event highly anticipated by the government. So in terms of the impact of this Congress, we can of course say that its impact in the advancement of engineering and science. So that's the primary impact, where the 1920s was a decade when Japanese academics changed their international status from borrower of ideas to self-sufficient innovative researchers. But if we take a step back and look at the bigger picture, it's actually an effort to push Japan towards internationalism. So here, the final quote is from my final report. From selecting executives that were well recognized by the United States, including Dan Takuma, the disproportionate number of banquets. They try to welcome people from all over the world. And also, they got excursions even after the main Congress. Those crew actually showed the determination, the dedication for those executives, including Dan Takuma and the government, to push Japan towards internationalism. And that's all I got today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shipeng. So now I would like to bring in a view from Japan by having Professor Yuichiro Shimizu of Keio University give us a little bit more of the kind of context, both back when Honma and other students were coming to Japan and how it changes into the into the 20th century and maybe all the way to the present. So thank you, Professor Shimizu.
So good afternoon, everyone again. And firstly, I would like to show my appreciation to the MIT, the counselors, and Mr. いなくなっちゃった Chris-san. Yeah, such a so important and priceless event it is, I think so. And my name is Yuichiro Shimizu from Keio University, Japan, and my major is political science as you and Japanese history. So today I would like to talk about the relationship between Japan and the US, especially focusing on this kind of the intellectual exchanges between US and Japan and Keio and MIT. So Professor Ogawara has just shared the story of Dan Takuma and Fukuzawa Stage-ro, two Japanese studies students from studies abroad 150 years ago. We also heard from MIT student about what those Japanese students learned, how they lived, and the challenges they faced during their time here, MIT. Building on these two presentations, I would like to discuss that students learned how they lived and how they navigated their lives, both 150 years ago student and today's student. Additionally, I would like to reflect on the past and the future of the international exchanges between Keio and MIT, which has been built upon the long-standing history of mutual learning about and collaboration. So what did young Japanese people learn? How did they live, and what mindset did they have in early Meiji period 150 years ago? Let us first explore these questions. The title of today's symposium is From Samurai to Engineers. Of course, some of these individuals also went not only to become lawyers, not only to become engineers, but also become lawyers and policymakers and more. Now, so how many you know? What's percentage? This is a question. What's percentage of Japanese population the samurai made up? What's percentage of the samurai people in the end of Edo era? Do you have any idea? 2%. So small. Thank you. And any other? No one? Yeah. Answer is, thank you so much. Answer is 7%. Only 7%. This 7%, the educated and literate class, helped sustain a period of over 250 years without war. It is called Pax Tokugawa era in Japan. However, as Western power expanded into Asia in 19th century, Japan faced a turning point in order to maintain its independence. This transformative era was made by the Meiji Restoration of 1898. Okay? This Meiji Restoration, in Japanese Meiji Ishin, was once commonly translated as the Meiji Restoration, but in recent years, it has come to referred to as the Meiji Revolution, or even in the plural form, Meiji Revolutions. This shift in terminology emphasized the idea that it was not merely a restoration, but rather revolution, on a sense of revolutions. This understanding became clearer when we look at the Charter Oath, which can be seen as a declaration of intent by the new Meiji government. As you can see, it outlines that important matter would be decided through discussion, and the people from all social classes would unite their heart, and everyone would have the opportunity to pursue their dreams. And old harmful customs would be abolished, and new knowledge from around all over the world, including US, would be embraced. Okay? This marks the beginnings of the era of continuous revolution and renewal in the 150 years ago of Japan. To drive this innovation and revolution, a well-talented and well-educated staff was essential, of course. In Japan already has a class of the highly knowledgeable samurai, as you know, but their expertise was primarily rooted in Eastern thought, Japanese thought. While maintaining this Eastern intellectual foundation, it's become necessary to learn Western technology and ideas, as Dan and Fukuoka and Honma. The individuals chosen for the task were the young people who were of schooling age around the time of the major revolutions. They began by acquiring foundational knowledge at the domestic institutions such as Keio University and so on in Japan, and then aspired to study abroad for further education. Their primary destination was the United States, particularly here, the East Coast. As previously introduced by Professor Ogawara and four students, figures like Honma and Dan studied engineering at MIT here, and while many other Japanese students pursued the political science and law at Harvard, and the finance at Yale. A significant number of these students were sponsored by the central and local government for their studies abroad, and upon their return, they served as government staff, engineers, and teachers, dismissing their knowledge widely in all over Japan through the Japanese own language, translated from this technology and knowledge from English to Japanese. The fact that these individuals came from traditional literate class and had literate class samurai and had an intellectual foundation in their native language greatly facilitated their effective acquisition of knowledge abroad and its subsequent dissemination upon their return to Japan. It is spread, this knowledge spread broadly in Japan. A child of samurai, they carried a sense of noblesse oblige, become expert in various fields and drive Japanese modernization. However, that alone would not have been enough to ensure Japan's successful modernization. As highlighted in the third article of Charter Oath, as you can see, the Meiji government aspired to create a society where everyone could realize their dreams. These aspirations extended beyond the samurai class, fostering a broader ambition of social mobility among the youth young age, which further propelled Japan's modernization. The ideal institutionally supported by the Article 19 of the Constitution of the Empire of Japan, it is promulgated in 1889. It declared that the civil and military office position previously not accessible only samurai class were now open to anyone based on merit and effort. This signified a shift class system towards the meritocracy, opening door for the officials of all. Simultaneously, this represented a transition from the era driven by noblesse oblige to one where individuals could pursue their own personal aspiration for social success. Okay. So what, turn to the topic to the just now status quo. So what do today's Japanese students think? How do they learn? And how do they engage with the world after 150 years after Meiji revolutions? For a long time, the term post-war has defined Japanese society. It embodies the desire for recover and development following the Japan's defeat in the Pacific War in 1945. However, next year, 2025, next year, will mark 80 years since end of the Pacific War. Given that there were 77 years from the Meiji revolutions to Japan's defeat in the war, the post-war period has already lasted longer than the pre-war era. Pre-war era. In recent years, there has been an increasing discussion about the end of the post-war era in Japan. The narrative has shifted from post-war recovery to the development, then to stability, and now a new era of innovation is often seen as an emerging, as MIT. So there has been an increase in the number of Japanese university students who have diverse experiences. Let me take a lecture of modern Japanese history class that I teach as an example. In this class, there are 150 students and 100 of them have lived abroad, therefore engaging our university. Their experiences are not limited to the US and Europe, but also including places like Asia and the Middle East and Africa, demonstrating a great diversity of them. These students who have acquired such a wide range of experience and values approach their studies with the strong intention of connecting academic learning to practice, aiming to bring about social changes. Sorry. 間に合わなかった、ここは。 They do not embody the concept of noblesse oblige as seen in the Meiji era 150 years ago, nor are they driven by the aspiration of social success. Instead, what we can call social innovation through self-realization is emerging. Let's look at a specific example from the student in my research lab. Although my field of expertise is modern Japanese history and political science, as I said, many social entrepreneurs have emerged from my lab. So one student organized a youth conference that brought together 250 young people from across over Japan to the charming local town in Nagano Prefecture, creating various local revitalization projects. See, sorry. See, they also founded a company that's reimaging and remarkets local products with a sense of kawaii, the cool, kind of so cute, redesigned to the highlight appeal of the regional area's potentials. Okay. Another student, concerned about the low intensity of politics among youth Japanese, focused on the communication skill of the Japanese comedians, and has been using their talent to deliver citizenship education class to high school students. As you know, Japan has a lot of so curious comedians. So another student, questioning the prevalent mindset of constant growth aimed Japan's declined birth rate and aging population, aging society, is working on creating systems that allow people to approach the end of life and the event with care deliberation. This initiative by him has garnered significant attention both domestically and internationally, because there is a kind of sense of Zen and Buddhism senses. These students' efforts rooted in their diverse experience values, as you know, noteworthy as they aim to discover and enhance unique aspects of Japan that go beyond traditional modernization. Efforts that leverage regional appeals deepening around the world. Connecting and developing these individuals is essential, of course, and for that, exchange is much more crucial. In 2016, Professor Nagahara kindly gave a guest lecture in my modern Japanese history class in Keio SFC. That connection led to the joint implementation of the World History class at MIT, managed by Professor Nagahara and Professor Eiichiro, and the Japan in World History class at Keio University SFC starting in 2018. These classes are held every other year, so with sessions conducted in 2018, 2020, 2022, and this year marks the fourth iteration. In this class, students from both universities, Keio and MIT, read materials related to Japan's modernization and collaborated through the MIT learning management system, engage in discussion, deepen their understanding, and ultimately given groups presentation during the joint class sessions. On the Keio side, the participants including not only Japanese students, but also students from China, Taiwan, Korea, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Indonesia, and Western countries, totaling 16 members. They allow to advance discussions from the perspective of true global history, rather than a Western-centric world history. This can be seen as a result of the international exchanges built up between MIT and Keio, I believe. Of course, online exchanges, these kind of online exchange have truly become seamless. Here are some photos I can see, you can see. One from when we hosted the Japanese Trek from Manhattan College in this May, and another from another is our visit to Taiwan last year when we engaged with the National Chenshu University, National Political Science University. So next, we hope to welcome the MIT committee to Japan, Keio, and further develop even more intensive exchanges over the online communication. Thank you for your attention and thank you for hearing my presentation. That's all of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Shimizu, and especially for that invitation for MIT students to come to Japan. I think we're going to have to make that happen. Thank you, everyone. I believe we are kind of running out of time. And so in order to give us maybe a few minutes to sort of solicit questions from you, I just want to end on this note. First of all, I want to welcome, I believe we have here now Deputy Consul General Minoya-san. Thank you so much for joining us here today from Japan. And also Consul Yoshida, who is here with us. Thank you both for joining us today and for your support. And by way of encouraging you to explore the online exhibit as well as that physical exhibit, I do want to just mention one student who we haven't talked about, and that's Kyoko Makino. For me, she was one of the funnest person to explore in this search. We talked about two men who came from Japan earlier on, but in fact, MIT's first woman international student also came from Japan, and she studied here between 1903 and 1905 in course 7, biology. She was a teacher in Japan teaching women at women's high school, and after MIT, she went back to Japan to educate Japanese women at several international high schools. And this summer, I was able to visit 2 of those schools, and at one of them, I found this picture with the help of the local archivist. This is a picture that was taken circa 1896, so just maybe 3 years before she came to America. And you can kind of see her with her fellow teachers, some of them, I think, from the West and others Japanese, as well as her Japanese student. And she's a really remarkable person. She published a 300+ page sort of book on women's physiology and hygiene after she came back from MIT. And so she's an educator, a biologist, and someone who I hope to research more. And in fact, in general, this project is an ongoing research project that I hope to continue with my future students and my future classes, and we'll be adding more to the exhibit. So I just want to show you at the very end this slide. You can use that QR code on the left to access the main online exhibit. You can also learn more about MIT Japan on the QR code on the right. But at this point, I want to end this panel presentation by thanking my fellow presenters and also thanking all of you who joined us again. Thank you so much for celebrating with us.
Thank you, Professor Nagahara, and the panelists and Professor Shimizu. Also on the right, the MIT Japan QR code, we are recording this event and we will be uploading the video as once we have the editing done. So if any of you who might have some curiosity and want to ask questions to any of our panelists here, if you can raise your hands. Any questions? Okay, hold on. We'll run the mic over. Alberto?
It's just a question for the first panelist. You had the diary. Where did you get that diary?
Yeah, so I have pictures of the diary in there. I actually have never held the physical diary myself. The scans were uploaded to the MIT Distinctive Collections. And so I was basically going off of those documents. It's like a 70-page-ish diary, the scans. I think think Nagahara-sensei, did you
Yeah,
take
so
the scans yourself?
all of the documents that the students have worked with are actually housed in the MIT distinctive collections, there's a reading room actually across the courtyard on the other hand side. In the early 2000s, the descendants of Eiichiro Honma donated his English language documents that date from the 1860s and 1870s, and that diary that Kailas looked at is part of that, along with his MIT coursework, letters, and things like that, and that kind of makes the foundation for the exhibit itself.
And if I may add, Shippen and I went to Usui Toge, and that's where the railroad was constructed. And on the day we were doing STEAM workshop for children for junior high, 5th, 6th, and 7th graders in the region. And on that special day, Honma Eiichiro-san's great-grandson came. And then we gave him one of our t-shirts. This was specially designed by one of our students. She's back there, Marwa, thank you. And he said to me, can I have another t-shirt? Because I want to give it to my aunt. And so we are now Instagram friends, and I can share with you later on the link of Honma Eiichiro-san's great-grandson. Do we have,
Yes.
we have a question in the back, Andrea?
Hello. Thank you for your presentation. And I don't know if you are aware that Dan Takuma's great-grandson, Dan Norihiko, he continued the tradition of the internationalism. He also studied in the US, but at Yale for architecture, and then housed about seven interns from MIT in architecture over the years. I was one of them, full disclosure. And I was wondering if you have reached out to him, the people who worked on the Dan Takuma family, because he might also be interested to share some stories.
Yeah, we haven't been able to get in touch with him yet, but that's a great suggestion. Thank you so much.
Oh, okay, can we have the mic up front here, please? Thank you. I think this might be, should we do the last question? Yeah, because we do have a reception, a light reception in the back. So if we can have the last question, thank you.
Sure, so I'm interested from all the student panelists, what you uncovered about their daily lives at MIT and whether you can draw any parallels to your own experience, or whether the experience has changed so much that the place is unrecognizable when it was across the river.
Oh, here.
I guess really quickly, in the diary, this is in Worcester, so I can't really say much, so I'm going to hand it over.
Oh yeah, from the Honma's academic record, he still did P-sets. He solved problems about geometry and trigonometry, which are very fundamental to civil engineering.
For Dan Takuma, he did a lot of calculations in his handwritten senior thesis. I don't think I'm gonna handwrite my senior thesis. I'm gonna type it, but definitely a lot of calculations, so similar.
I'm gonna refer to the previous, the language, lose of language ability when you go back to your home country, because I'm an international student as well. So when I go back to my home country, it's, sometimes you just sort of forgot how to say some word, but you try to express it in English. So I have similar experience.
Thank you. Is it a short question?
Oh, yes, a short one.
Okay.
I just wanted to ask, I guess it's in Don. So this is very undergraduate heavy, but MIT is majority graduate.
Yeah, because we're recording, just wanted to get here. It's switched on.
Oh, you can hear it now? Okay, so I just wondered, MIT is very graduate heavy now, and this is all about undergraduates. What do we know about MIT's first Japanese graduate students and when they came?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So they kind of start the wave, the very first wave comes in the 1870s, I think I'm Mike, so 1880s. And so At first, it's actually mostly undergrads and also special students, people who come kind of on a short term. But it's really from the early decades of the 20th century that the first wave of graduate students come. And they do actually eventually become kind of the larger group compared to the undergrads. And in fact, one of the very interesting person to join as a graduate student is one of the members of the Mitsui house, the owner family of the Mitsui conglomerate that Dan worked at. One of their scions become a graduate student at MIT. And that research, we haven't quite gotten there yet. So we hope to get there eventually. Thank you so much for the question.
Yeah, thank you for the questions. And just to add that the international students of the undergraduates, since MIT is a land-grant institute, we can't have more than 11% of our undergraduate population coming from overseas. So there's that sort of limit versus at the graduate level, it depends on each department's decision and how they want to accept the students there. So everyone, well, thank you very much for coming here and being part of our celebration and learning more about the first, from the samurais and the first MIT students from Japan. If you will, welcome me and giving a round of applause to our wonderful panelists. Thank you for staying overtime. I know we ran over. We do have some nibbles in the back. Please join us in some Japanese style food. We have some washoku, Japanese delicacies, and sushi. And if you can come and speak with the panelists as well.
And there's just, there is a pop-up exhibit with the actual original historical documents in the back you might have seen as you were going in. So do take a look at it if you have a chance. Thank you so much.
Thank you.